The city was alive with noise, but high above the crowded streets, one pair of eyes watched in silence. Behind the tall glass windows of a shining tower, an alien CEO sat in the shadows of his office. His name was Zeleron, ruler of one of the largest companies in the galaxy. He owned fleets of ships, factories on distant worlds, and wealth beyond measure. He could command thousands with a single word. Yet tonight, he was not watching numbers or markets or politics. He was watching one human. The man below was no leader, no warrior, no starborn traveler. He was only a father. A poor man with worn hands and tired eyes, carrying heavy boxers through the rain. His shirt was torn at the sleeve. His shoes looked thin and broken. Every step seemed to hurt him, but he never stopped. He moved forward, as if nothing in the world could force him to give up. Zeleron leaned closer to the screen, his alien eyes narrowing. He could not understand. On his homeworld, weakness was punished and struggle was avoided. Comfort was bought, pain was hidden, and tears had no place in the life of the powerful. Yet this human father had nothing, and still he walked with a strange strength. The rain grew stronger, falling in silver sheets across the street. The man bent his back and covered the box with his arms to keep it dry. Cars sped by, splashing water against his legs, but he did not complain. He only lowered his head and kept moving. The alien CEO's hand froze above his desk. Something inside his chest, something old and unfamiliar, began to stir when the man finally reached the small, crumbling building he called home. The CEO saw him pause. The father closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and pushed open the door. For a moment, Zeleron thought the man would collapse. But then, as the door opened, two children ran to him, their little faces bright with joy. They hugged his legs, shouting with happiness. The alien tilted his head, surprised. He expected the father to show anger or sadness. Instead, the man smiled. A tired, weak smile, but full of warmth. He set the box down, picked up the children, and kissed their foreheads as if they were treasures worth more than gold. Zeleron could not look away. He had seen soldiers win battles, leaders make speeches, and workers labor for survival. But he had never seen a smile like this. A man broken by life, yet shining with love. The father sat with his children on the floor, pulling out a loaf of bread from the box. It was not much, only dry food and a little fruit. But the children's eyes lit up as if it were a feast. They laughed, they clapped, they thanked him. The man broke the bread into small pieces, giving the larger parts to them and keeping the smallest piece for himself. He ate last, pretending he was full, while his stomach growled in silence. The alien CEO felt his chest tighten. This was not the strength of armies or the power of wealth. This was something different, something deeper. A human father giving everything, even his own hunger. For the sake of his children, as the night went on, the alien did not move from his chair. He watched as the man told his children stories before bed. He watched as the father's smile faded once they slept. Alone, in the dim light, the man sat quietly, his shoulders shaking. Zeleron realized he was crying. Silent tears, hidden from the children. Tears of exhaustion, of fear, of pain, too heavy to share. Zeleron's hand gripped the arm of his chair. For the first time in years, words failed him. His wealth, his empire, his endless control, none of it gave him answers. He had seen countless workers before, but he had never stopped to look closely. Never stopped to listen to the quiet suffering of one man. The human father wiped his tears, stood up again, and began preparing for tomorrow. He folded his shirt neatly, patched a hole in his shoe with tape, and set aside the tools he would need. He moved slowly, his body heavy, but his eyes showed no surrender. Tomorrow would be another battle, and he was ready to fight again. The alien CEO leaned back, speechless. He had seen many things in his long life: wars, victories, betrayals, but never this. Never a warrior who carried no sword. Never a hero who fought with empty hands. He whispered to himself, though no one could hear. How does he keep going? And for the first time, the most powerful alien in the galaxy felt small. The night was silent. But inside the small room, the father's battle never ended. His name was Daniel. To the world, he was just another poor worker, invisible among the crowd. But to his children, he was everything. Their shield. Their light. Their hope. XEL, or Anne, the alien CEO, sat in his dark office far away, still watching through the hidden screens. He had thought the day's struggle was enough to break any man. Yet here, in the quiet of midnight, Daniel's true burden was revealed. The children slept peacefully on a thin mattress. Their faces were soft, untouched by hunger for the moment. Daniel sat near them, staring at their small hands curled against their chests. He had given them all the bread, keeping only scraps for himself. His stomach ached, but he ignored it. What mattered was that they would wake up with strength. He leaned back against the wall, his body shaking with exhaustion. The cracked ceiling above him dripped water from the leaking roof. Daniel's shirt clung to his back, still damp from the rain. His feet were swollen, his shoes torn and patched with tape. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, but his mind refused to sleep. Tomorrow, he had to wake up before dawn, ready to work again. If he stopped even for a day, the children would go hungry. Zelleran's eyes narrowed as he studied the man. On his world, strength was shown with loud victories, with wealth and armies. But this man's strength was silent, hidden in small acts. He carried pain as if it were nothing, smiled as if his heart was not breaking, and stood tall when his body wanted to fall. Daniel pulled out a small box from under the mattress. Inside were a few coins, life savings. He counted them carefully, his fingers trembling. Not enough for rent. Not enough for food for the week. He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against the box. His lips moved in a whisper, a prayer not meant for anyone to hear. The alien CEO tilted his head, listening. The man did not ask for wealth, or power, or comfort. He asked only for his children's safety, for their health, for their future. Zelleran leaned closer to the screen, unsettled. How could someone with nothing still think only of others? In his empire, even the rich thought only of themselves. Leaders betrayed each other for more power. Families broke apart for inheritance. Yet here was a man who had no reason to stand and. Still he stood. As the night stretched on, Daniel picked up a worn notebook. Inside were small drawings his children had made. Houses with bright colors. A field of flowers. A smiling family holding hands. The paper was rough, but Daniel traced the drawings with care, as if they were priceless jewels. For a moment, he allowed himself to dream. He imagined a real home, one with solid walls, a roof that did not leak, and beds for his children. He imagined a dinner table full of food, laughter filling the room. The dream was so clear in his mind, yet so far from his reach. Slowly, his eyes filled with tears. But when one of his children stirred in their sleep, Daniel quickly wiped his face. He forced a smile again, even though no one was watching. He whispered softly, promising them that one day things would be better. Zelleran pressed his hand against the glass of his office window, though the man was worlds away. He felt something strange inside, a mixture of shame and awe. He had lived his life chasing power, yet he felt weaker than this human father. Daniel had no armies, no empire, no riches. But he had something greater, a reason to fight. The alien CEO thought about his own childhood. He had grown up with tutors, servants, and endless wealth. He never worried about food or shelter. He never knew what it meant to fear tomorrow. And yet, despite all of that, he had never seen a smile as pure as the one Daniel gave his children. The clock struck midnight. Daniel finally lay down on the floor beside the mattress, giving the bed fully to the children. He curled up, his body stiff with pain. The rain outside tapped against the window. His breathing was shallow but steady. He was ready to face another day, no matter the cost. In his tower, Zelarin closed his eyes. The image of Daniel burned in his mind. He had seen heroes of war, kings of planets, and traders who controlled entire markets. But none of them carried a burden like this man. None of them had such quiet, unshakable strength. The alien whispered into the silence of his empty office. "This is not weakness. This is something greater." For the first time in his long life, Zelarin felt unsure. He wondered if all his wealth, all his victories, meant less than the simple, painful, beautiful burden of one human father. Morning came too soon. The sun rose weakly through the gray clouds, lighting the broken streets of the city. Daniel, the human father, woke before the children. His body ached as if he had carried mountains through the night, but he forced himself to stand. Quietly, he checked on his children, kissed their foreheads, and prepared for another long day. Zelarin, the alien CEO, had not slept. From his high tower, he continued watching. The human fascinated him, pulling at questions he could not answer. Why did the man keep fighting when life gave him only pain? Why did he smile when his heart carried so much sorrow? Daniel put on his shoes. They were old, full of cracks, and the sole was nearly gone. He tied the laces carefully, almost gently, as if afraid they would tear apart completely. The alien CEO leaned forward in his chair. Those shoes looked like they had survived wars, yet the man treated them like treasure. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets were wet and muddy. Daniel carried his tools and walked to work. Each step pressed water into his shoes. His socks were soaked, but he did not slow down. He limped slightly, but his face showed determination. The alien CEO could not look away. Hours passed. Daniel lifted boxes, fixed broken pipes, and carried heavy loads for strangers who barely noticed him. He worked quietly, with no complaints, no rest. His back bent under the weight, his hands covered in cuts. Every time he stumbled, he forced himself back up. The alien CEO felt his own chest tighten as he watched. Then it happened. On the way home, Daniel's shoe finally gave up. The sole ripped apart, flapping against the ground with every step. Mud seeped inside. His foot slipped with each movement. The children were waiting at home, but he still had a long walk ahead. Zelarin's eyes widened. For the first time, he felt panicked not for himself, but for this fragile human. One shoe broken, no money for another. Would the man stop? Would he finally collapse? But Daniel did not stop. He picked up a piece of wire from the street and tied the shoe back together. It looked ugly, but it held enough to keep walking. He smiled faintly, as if telling himself it was fine, even though his foot bled beneath the leather. When he reached home, his children ran to greet him. Daniel hid the broken shoe behind his bag, forcing his tired face into a warm smile. The children laughed and hugged him, never noticing the pain. He set down a small bag of food, only bread and one apple. They cheered as if it were a feast. The alien CEO leaned back in silence. He could not believe what he was seeing. A man so broken, yet still pretending to be strong. Zelarin's empire had taught him to see weakness as failure. But now, watching Daniel, he began to wonder if weakness could hide the greatest strength of all. Later that night, when the children were asleep, Daniel sat alone, repairing his shoe with a needle and thread. His fingers were clumsy, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but he worked patiently. Each stitch was crooked, but each one showed his refusal to surrender. Zelarin whispered to himself, "Why does he keep going?" The alien CEO had seen countless workers across galaxies, But they broke quickly when faced with hardship. They gave up when comfort was lost. But this man, this father, carried the world on his shoulders with nothing but broken shoes and silent courage. The repaired shoe sat by the bed, ugly but ready for another day. Daniel smiled faintly as he looked at it, not because it was strong, but because it was enough. Enough to take one more step, enough to keep moving for the sake of his children. Zelleran's chest felt heavy. He had ships that crossed stars, factories that built wonders, and palaces filled with treasures. Yet none of it compared to the quiet dignity of a man who refused to let broken shoes stop him. The alien CEO sat in silence, realizing something he had never known before. True power was not in wealth, or armies, or fear. True power was in the heart of a human father who kept walking, even when every step was pain. And so, the alien kept watching. Silent, speechless. Changed. The city was quiet again. Darkness filled the streets, broken only by the weak glow of lamps and the sound of dripping water from rooftops. Inside the small, crumbling room, Daniel sat on the floor. His children were asleep, curled up together on the thin mattress, dreaming in safety. Their breathing was soft, steady, and full of innocence. But Daniel was wide awake, his back pressed against the cold wall, his eyes fixed on the ceiling that leaked drops of rainwater. The patched shoes rested beside him, still damp from the day's long walk. His hands trembled slightly as he rubbed them together for warmth. High above, in his shining tower, Zelleran watched. The alien CEO had not moved for hours. He sat in the shadows of his office, eyes locked on the human father. He had seen men cry before soldiers after defeat, workers begging for mercy, but there was something different here, something heavier. Daniel's face looked calm at first, but slowly, cracks began to show. His lips pressed tightly together, his eyes glistening as he tried to hold it in. Then, without a sound, a tear slipped down his cheek. He covered his face with his hand, but the tears kept falling. He bent forward, shoulders shaking, his body silently breaking apart in the darkness. Zelleran leaned closer to the screen, his alien heart tightening. This man had smiled all day for his children. He had walked with broken shoes, lifted heavy boxers, and laughed with them as if nothing was wrong. But now, when they could not see him, the truth came out. The father's tears were not for himself. They were for the fear he carried. Fear of not earning enough tomorrow. Fear of his children going hungry. Fear of failing them. He cried in silence, hiding even from the night, because he did not want his children to know the weight he carried. The alien CEO felt something stir deep inside him, something he could not name. He had seen tears before, but they were always selfish tears of loss, of anger, of defeat. Daniel's tears were different. They were tears of love, tears born from sacrifice. Daniel pressed his forehead against the wall and whispered softly, "Please, let me keep going. Let me protect them. Just a little longer." Zelleran's hands curled into fists. He had never begged for anything in his life. He had commanded, demanded, and taken. Yet this human begged not for wealth or power, but only for strength to carry on. The alien CEO turned away for a moment, staring at his reflection in the glass. His own face looked strange to him, cold, distant, untouched by such pain. He had lived a life of comfort and control. He had never known hunger, never feared losing everything. And yet, as he looked back at Daniel, he realized that all his riches had never given him the kind of strength this man showed tonight. Daniel wiped his face quickly. When his son stirred in his sleep, he forced his tears to stop, his breathing too steady. He leaned over, pulled the blanket up around the children, and kissed their heads softly. The smile returned, though his eyes were still red. He whispered, "Don't worry. Daddy is here. Everything will be fine. Zeleron froze. The lie was gentle, but it carried a truth deeper than anything he had ever known. This man was falling apart, but he refused to let his children see. He carried his pain alone so they could dream in peace. The alien CEO pressed his hand against the screen as if trying to touch the man through the glass. His chest felt heavy. For the first time in his long life, he was speechless. Words, numbers, strategies, none of them mattered here. All that mattered was the sight of one man's quiet battle in the darkness. Hours passed. Daniel finally leaned back, closing his eyes. His face still carried exhaustion, but his jaw was set with determination. Tomorrow he would rise again, put on the broken shoes, and carry the same burden without complaint. Zeleron did not move. He had seen wars, he had seen worlds rise and fall, but nothing had shaken him like this. The midnight tears of a human father had pierced deeper than any blade in the silence of his great office. The alien whispered to himself, "These are not the tears of weakness. They are the tears of a warrior." And for the first time, the powerful alien CEO felt small, fragile, and utterly human. The next morning came cold and gray. A weak sun peeked through the clouds, but its warmth did not reach the damp streets. Daniel rose quietly from the floor, his body stiff with pain. He stretched his aching arms and rubbed his swollen feet before slipping on the patched shoes again. His children still slept peacefully, unaware of the storm their father fought inside. From his high tower, Zeleron, the alien CEO, continued watching. He had expected the man to break by now. Any worker from his own world would have collapsed long ago. But Daniel rose again, slow yet steady, as if his body refused to give up even when his strength was gone. Daniel boiled a small pot of water and dropped in the last bit of tea leaf he had saved. It was thin, weak, hardly more than colored water. He poured it into 2 small cups for his children, pretending it was a grand breakfast. He drank nothing himself, only smiling as he watched them sip and laugh. When the children left for school, carrying their old books, Daniel stepped out to begin his day. His first stop was a construction site on the edge of the city. The foreman waved him over, pointing to a stack of heavy metal pipes. Daniel bent his back and lifted them, one after another, his arms shaking under the weight. Sweat rolled down his face even though the air was cold. Workers half his age struggled and complained, but Daniel kept going. Silent and steady. Zeleron's alien eyes narrowed as he studied the man. He saw the way Daniel's hands bled from rough steel. He saw the way his legs trembled after hours of lifting. But what struck him most was that Daniel never stopped. Every coin he earned meant food for his children, and that thought was enough to push him forward. By midday, Daniel's lunch break arrived. Other men bought bread and meat from a nearby stall. Daniel sat apart, pulling from his pocket a small piece of stale bread he had saved from yesterday. He chewed slowly, pretending it filled him, while his stomach growled louder than the machines around him. Zeleron leaned closer to the screen, his heart unsettled. On his homeworld, skipping a meal was unthinkable. Here was a man starving, yet he smiled as if nothing was wrong. This was not survival alone, was sacrifice. Quiet, invisible sacrifice that no one else noticed. When the work ended, Daniel did not return home. He walked across the city to another job, repairing broken wires in a warehouse. Sparks lit the air as he climbed ladders, balancing on weak beams. The pay was small, the risk was high, but he accepted it. Every coin mattered. Every danger was worth facing if it meant his children could eat. As night fell, Daniel finally returned home, carrying a small bag of food. His children ran to greet him, their eyes bright with joy. He gave them the bread and fruit, watching them eat with pure delight. He kept only a small piece for himself, chewing slowly so they would not notice how little he had. Later that night, when his children were asleep, Daniel sat by the dim light of a candle. He opened his notebook again, the one filled with his children's drawings. He touched each picture carefully, whispering to himself, one day I will give them this life." His voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. Zelleran leaned back in his chair, silent. He had watched soldiers in battlefields, leaders in parliaments, traders in markets. All of them fought for glory, for power, for wealth. But this man fought an unseen battle, a war no one honored, no one praised. His weapons were broken shoes, bleeding hands, and an unshakable will. His battlefield was hunger, exhaustion, and endless poverty. And yet, he fought every day. The alien CEO felt a strange weight in his chest. He thought of his empire ships, factories, servants. He thought of the battles he had won with fleets of soldiers. And then he thought of Daniel, one man fighting alone. For nothing but the smile of his children. Zelleran whispered to himself, almost in disbelief, "This is not weakness. This is greatness." The night grew quiet again, but Zelleran could not look away. He had seen power in many forms, but none as pure as this unseen battle of a human father. The days rolled into one another, each harder than the last. Daniel rose before dawn, worked until night, and returned home with aching bones and bleeding hands. His patched shoes barely held together, and his thin jacket could not protect him from the biting wind. Still, he carried on. For his children, he carried on. But even the strongest fighters have limits. Zelleran, the alien CEO, sat in his glass tower, watching, as always. He had studied Daniel's endless struggle with fascination and awe. Yet tonight, he saw something different, something dangerous. The evening was cold and the rain fell heavy. Daniel walked slowly down the street, his steps uneven. His shoulders sagged under the weight of his tools, and his eyes looked distant, unfocused. Every few steps, he stumbled. He pressed a hand to his chest, as if forcing his heart to keep beating. Zelleran leaned closer to the screen, unease tightening inside him. He had seen the man suffer before, but never like this. Daniel finally reached home. His children ran to him with their usual joy, hugging his legs. He smiled faintly, but it was weaker than before. He handed them the food he had managed to buy less than yesterday, but still something. They clapped, their eyes full of gratitude. Daniel sat with them, listening to their laughter, hiding the storm inside his body. After dinner, he tucked them into bed, kissed their foreheads, and whispered his usual promise, "Tomorrow will be better." His voice was soft, almost trembling. Then, when the children's eyes closed, Daniel sank onto the floor. The alien CEO froze as he watched. Daniel's hands shook violently. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his temples. He leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. For a moment, Zelleran thought he would recover, as he always did. But then Daniel's body gave out. He collapsed sideways, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Zelleran's heart pounded in his chest. For the first time, he felt true fear. Not for himself, not for his empire, but for this one fragile human. Daniel lay on the ground, his breath shallow, his body trembling. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, and he whispered softly, "Stay strong." For them? Then his eyes closed again. The children stirred in their sleep, unaware of what was happening. The room was silent, except for the sound of rain and the faint, struggling breath of their father. Zelleran gripped the arms of his chair. His empire stretched across worlds. His commands could move armies, ships, and wealth. Yet here he was, powerless, watching, only watching. A voice inside him screamed, "Do something." But another voice held him back. To reveal himself meant crossing a line he had never crossed. He was an observer, not a savior. He had built his life on control, not compassion. And yet, The sight of the man lying broken on the floor tore at him. For the first time, the alien CEO realized he could not keep watching forever. His chest burned with something he did not understand: guilt, shame, fear, respect, all at once. Daniel's body shivered as the night dragged on. His face was pale, but even in weakness, his hand reached out toward his children's bed, as if making sure they were still safe. That simple gesture broke something inside Zellerin. The alien CEO stood suddenly from his chair, his tall figure trembling. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, cold, powerful, untouched. And behind the reflection, the image of a man who had given everything and was about to lose the last thing he had left. Himself, Zellerin whispered. "If I remain silent, he may not rise again." The words echoed in his empty office. For the first time in his long life, silence was not enough. The night stretched on, heavy with tension. Daniel lay weak and fragile, balanced on the edge between life and death. His unseen battle had finally pushed him to the breaking point, and Zellerin, the alien CEO, stood torn between the role he had always played, an unseen watcher, and the role that fate now demanded of him. The rain had not stopped by morning. The city streets were dark and wet, filled with rushing cars and people hiding under umbrellas. Inside the small home, Daniel lay weak on the floor. His body trembled, his face pale, but his eyes opened slowly at the sound of his children stirring. They rubbed their eyes, smiling as they woke, but their smiles faded when they saw their father. He pushed himself up, forcing a smile to calm them. "I'm fine," he whispered. His voice was shaky, but he stood anyway. For their sake, he always stood. High above, Zellerin watched. The alien CEO had not moved from his tower. His chest felt heavy, his mind restless. He had seen Daniel collapse. He had seen his children's worried eyes. He knew if this went on, the man would not survive many more days. For the first time in his long, powerful life, Zellerin made a decision that had nothing to do with wealth or empire. He would act. When the children left for school, Daniel sat alone, trying to stitch his torn jacket. His hands shook too much to thread the needle. That was when he noticed something strange outside his door. A small box, dry despite the rain, wrapped in plain paper. He frowned, confused. Slowly, he picked it up and brought it inside. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was food: fresh bread, fruit, cheese, and even a small packet of meat. Daniel froze. His children hadn't eaten meat in months. At the bottom of the box was another surprise: a pair of strong, new shoes. He touched them carefully, his eyes wide. He whispered, "Who? Who did this?" But no one answered. From his tower, Zellerin watched the man's shock. The alien CEO's chest tightened as he saw Daniel sink to his knees, holding the food and shoes as if they were treasures beyond measure. Tears filled his eyes, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of relief. When the children returned from school, they saw the table full of food. Their faces lit up with joy, their laughter filling the small room like sunshine after endless rain. Daniel smiled too, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He let them eat until they were full, watching them with a quiet happiness that made his exhaustion fade. He put on the new shoes later that night. They fit perfectly, warm and strong. For the first time in months, his feet did not ache with every step. He looked at himself in the broken mirror, whispering, "Thank you, whoever you are." Zellerin leaned back in his chair, silent. He had given fortunes away in his empire, signed deals worth billions, but nothing had ever felt like this. A simple box of food and shoes had done more than all his riches ever could, but he was not done. The next morning, another box appeared. This one had more food, medicine, and a little envelope with coins inside. Enough to pay rent, enough to ease the father's fear. Daniel found it and shook his head in disbelief. He whispered, "This is a miracle." He never saw the tall shadow watching from the distance, hidden in the rain. Zellerin never revealed himself. He did not want thanks. He only wanted to keep watching the man who had shown him what true strength was. Days turned into weeks. Daniel grew stronger again, his children healthier. The food and help kept coming, always appearing at the door, always a mystery. The neighbors whispered about an angel, a spirit, some secret helper. But Daniel never knew the truth. One night, when his children were asleep, Daniel sat at the table and whispered into the silence, "Whoever you are, you saved us. I will never forget this." In his high tower, far away, Zellerin closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt peace. He had come as a watcher, a silent judge of human struggle. But he was leaving as something different. Someone touched. Someone changed. He whispered into the empty air, "I came to study. I stayed to learn. And I will never forget the strength of one human heart." The rain outside eased. The night grew calm. And though Daniel never knew his name, Apata, alien CEO, would always remember him, the human father who fought an unseen war, and who taught an alien ruler the meaning of courage.